friend and neighbor gave me this Nirvana II. It was given to him by someone who had moved out of the area. It came in pretty good shape. Some of the decals were curling and peeling off, and the stand was a little wobbly. I'll work on that later. The first thing I did was peel off all of the decals. The decals on the hull came off easy. The decals on the top of the deck, they also came off easy, but they left a white spot where the plastic wasn't faded, so there was two colors plastic on it. But the most difficult were the decals on the sails. They peeled off, and the one on the non-shiny side of the mainsail started to rip apart the mylar. So I ended up covering that with my sail number, which is just the simple letter K. It came with this little laser 3-channel receiver, which I didn't think worked. I couldn't bind it to my radio. It wouldn't light any lights. Then I measured the voltage on it, and it was 3.5 volts. And I had 4 brand new AA batteries in, which were measuring 6 volts. And every time I hooked the receiver up, it measured 3.5 volts. I thought perhaps the switch was dirty, and I wiggled the switch, and I got a consistent reading of 3.5 volts on the receiver all the time. So I went ahead and replaced it with a different receiver. I knew I wanted to do that anyhow because I wanted a receiver that would send telemetry data back so that I could tell when the boat's sailing what my battery voltage was and my receiver strength. After I replaced it with a better receiver, the better receiver still wouldn't work. So I checked further, and it was just a bad connection in the battery pack from rust and corrosion. The bottom of the servos was all rusty. A lot of water had been in the battery and receiver compartment. This is the receiver that I replaced. They're cheap on Amazon, and they work good, and they have telemetry coming back with the receiver strength and the receiver voltage. But they're a little large for this radio compartment. Nevertheless, I managed to cram it in and go sailing for the first time. After reading all of the suggestions for improvements in the Nirvana forum online, I got a piece of plastic from this old milk bottle to cover between the servos in the receiver and battery compartment box to stop any interference of the lines going to the winch so that they wouldn't get tangled up. That seemed like a really good idea. I was able to obtain this receiver box cover from a gentleman on the Nirvana forum. He 3D printed it for me, and it fit quite nicely. But I had difficulty getting the decorative cover on over the top after I got the correct battery compartment cover. More on that later. So here we are at the lake for the first test sail. I couldn't get the decorative cover to snap on over the top of the new battery compartment cover, so I went ahead and sailed it anyway with it just loosely fitting on the top. Since there was no real wind this day, I thought it would be okay. My main concern on this first sail was how does she float on the water line. I was concerned about the lead weights the previous owner had placed in the back, and also, of course, does it leak? You can see the mainsail has yellowed much more than the jib. I would guess the jib has been replaced sometime in its past. Also, the white patch on the mainsail is from removing the decal. Well, it didn't leak and it floated on the waterline fine. So back at the shop, my next concern was how to get the decorative cover to fit over the radio compartment cover. I put some masking tape on and marked it with a dry felt tip pen to try and rub off to see where it was rubbing. So I spotted a couple places and I started filing down the battery compartment cover, but I just couldn't make it fit right. It seemed like the geometry was just wrong the way the boat was built. The front of this battery cover was a little too high and the back of the battery cover was way too high. So I ground off the trims on the bottom of the cover, took it out, put it back in, and made it fit so that I could get the battery compartment cover over the top of this receiver compartment. In order to do this, I had to replace the rudder servo, which was too tall. Here's the new rudder servo next to the old rudder servo, which was too tall to lower the back of the radio compartment. This old rudder servo worked fine on the first sail, so it was a shame to have to replace it, but it was just too tall to make the battery compartment top fit. The sail servo, on the other hand, was kind of a dog. It was very difficult. It wouldn't respond to trims until I turned the trims a mile, so I replaced it. Here are the two new servos that I replaced in the receiver compartment. I took close-up pictures of both the old and the new sail servos and counted the teeth, and sure enough, the new servo had 25 teeth and the old one had 24, so it wouldn't fit on the servo arm until I modified it. Here's a picture of the bottom and the top of the radio compartment with the new servos, the new radio, and the old AA battery still installed. Now the radio receiver compartment slants back and it allows the decorative cover to snap in place like it should. On the floor of the workshop, I added my sail number, the letter K, made out of black electrician's tape. So now it's time to test it out and go sailing again. Today we had decent wind, so the Nirvana was sailing actually quite wonderfully. I was real happy with it. We were in the lake for almost 2 hours. The only disappointment was at the end of the day, after I got home and looked in the battery compartment, I had a lot of water, so I still got some more tasks to do. Here I am, sailing side by side with my friend's Eclipse. When the wind was steady, we went about the same speed as each other. So the first task back at the shop was to try and fix the water leaks. I was going to put some silicone seal around the radio compartment cover. I covered it with cellophane wrap here. Then I put silicone bead on the inside of the flange of the radio compartment cover. Then I fastened it on top of the boat, and then I clamped it down and let it dry for 2 days. After I popped the cover back off, it still smelled strong of silicone, so I'm going to let that cure for another couple of days in open air. I thought probably a major part of the water getting into the radio compartment might be from this rudder servo arm going through the back. You can see the rubber is terribly deteriorated. So I figured maybe I could fix that by removing it and replacing it with a balloon. So I scraped it all out and sanded it down so I have a surface to fasten the balloon to. I wasn't sure how to glue the balloon, so I experimented with some silicone and some E6000 and some T6000 adhesive. I also tried CA. That didn't work very well. Here I'm inserting the rudder control arm through a little hole I made in the balloon. You can't believe how long it took me to get that in there. I'm using this screwdriver to lift up the control arm so that I could get the adhesive down to the bottom side of the outside of the balloon. And then I also did the top side, the left side, the right side, and the bottom side on the inside of the receiver box using some clamps to hold the balloon in various awkward positions. You can't believe how long that took. I was concerned about what kind of glue to use to put the foam over the leads going to the sail servo and out the rudder, but turns out that silicone worked pretty good, so I was testing it here. Finally, for the first time since I got the boat, the decorative cover snapped on nice and tight. Notice the discoloration. The decorative cover is nice and white, and the hull has actually changed to a yellowish color that white normally does when plastic gets old. I think my real problem here was that the original owner must have had to replace the decorative cover because he lost it, and he probably got one for a Nirvana I, and this is a Nirvana II, and maybe that's why nothing really aligned right and seemed to fit. Either way, I hacked it up so that it seems like it was made to be this way. So I took her for a test run to see if everything was watertight now that I thought I had improved the fit of everything. I was purposely trying to find some good wind and make it keel over quite a bit so I'd have a valid test. That seemed like a pretty good test, so I took her home to see if there was any water down in the radio compartment, and there was a little. What frustration. Now I decided to remove the receiver from the bottom of the radio compartment because the contacts were getting wet from the water seepage in, and also I took the opportunity to install a Lipo battery, a 2S battery, which of course wouldn't fit without some modification, so I dremeled out some more plastic and I remounted everything and redid the wiring. I was very discouraged to find out, and I had never had Lipos before, that the way you have to charge them is with two different connectors, one for the balancing part of the battery charger and one for the main output DC voltage. So I didn't want to do that, so instead I rewired everything so I could use one connector, and I had to order a cable from Amazon so that I had a 5-pin connector instead of a 3-pin connector so I could add the extra plus and minus to the same thing. And then I had a long enough wire that I could, with one plug, recharge the Lipo battery in the boat. So here I'm charging the Lipo battery in my garage. This is my charging station setup. Next to, on the left is the Emma, and on the right is Daisy. So we're back at the lake to test out the Lipo battery. My onboard voltage monitor on the transmitter said I started at 8.1 volts. I sailed it for around 1 hour, maybe slightly over an hour, and by the time I got home it was still reading 8.1 and 8.0. It was flickering back between the two. So I would say the Lipo battery installation was quite successful. I never felt any extra load on the servos, running them at over 7 volts, and they never chattered or oscillated like they used to on 6 volts with the AA batteries. So I'm happy with the results. Thanks again everybody for watching. I hope you enjoy the video. If you don't mind, if you hit the like button and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it.